You reach the main door, a wide barrier of heavy oak planks bound with iron straps, and you pause before it, letting the last of the daylight trace the grain of the wood. A large iron key hangs from a leather cord at your belt, and you take it in your free hand, feeling the cool metal and the simple shape of the wards. You insert the key into the lock, turning it slowly. The mechanism moves with a low, well-oiled click that resonates through the timber. The door swings inward on hinges that protest with a single long groan, then settle into silence as you step over the threshold. Inside, the air is cooler by a full measure, smelling of dry clay, old wood, and a faint trace of olive oil that seems to live permanently in the walls. You stand for a moment just within the doorway, allowing your eyes to adjust to the dimness, and then you reach to the small ledge carved into the brickwork to your left and set the lamp there, its small flame now steady and still. The departing day god, a man named Lucius, rises from the wooden stool just inside the door. His face is lined and familiar, and you have seen it so many evenings that you no longer register its features beyond the simple recognition of a colleague. He nods once, a slight inclination of the head that you return in the same manner, and then he hands you the tally stick. The stick is a length of split pine, darkened by the grip of many hands, with a series of notches running along one flat side. The notches for the afternoon hours are shallow and neat, and you note that he has already cut the mark for the final hour of his watch. Lucia speaks in a low voice that barely rises above the river's murmur, telling you that all is quiet, that nothing has moved, that the main door has remained locked, and that the grain sacks in the far corner were checked once at mid-afternoon and found to be dry. You listen, taking in the words without needing to reply beyond a soft acknowledgement, and then Lucius gathers his own cloak and a small leather satchel and steps out through the door into the gathering dusk. The door closes behind him with a solid thud, and you are alone with the silence of the warehouse. You turn the iron key from the inside, sliding the heavy bolt into place with a familiar scrape, and then you take up the lamp and begin your first slow circuit of the perimeter. The warehouse is a single great room, its ceiling supported by rows of brick pillars that march away into shadow, and between them run narrow aisles flanked by stored goods of every shape. You walk first to the right, where the outer wall is thick brick laid in a neat herringbone pattern, and you let your free hand trail lightly along the surface as you move. The brick feels cool and slightly rough under your fingertips, with occasional patches of salt bloom that powder away at a touch. At the base of the wall, a line of small ventilation slits admit thin blades of fading daylight, each one crossed with an iron grill that you test with a gentle push. None shift. You pause at the northeast corner, where a pile of broken amphorae sherds has lain for as long as you've held this watch, the terracotta fragments stacked in a tidy mound that nobody disturbs. The sherds are cool and inert, their jagged edges softened by a fine coating of dust. You continue along the rear wall, past the tall dolia, until you reach the single high window that looks out toward the river, its wooden shutter latched securely from the inside. You lift the latch, just for a moment, to peer out at the darkening water, and you see the surface of the Tiber moving slowly south, catching the last glow of the sky in faint coppery ripples, before you close and latch the shutter once more. Back at the main door, you settle onto the wooden stool, the same one that Lucius occupied, arranging your cloak so that it covers your shoulders and spills over your knees. The stool is a simple three-legged piece of oak, worn concave by years of use, and it fits the shape of your body in a way that has become, over time, its own kind of comfort. You place the lamp on the ledge at your left hand, its flame now burning clear and tall, and you set the tally stick across your knees, letting your thumb rest on the groove for the first hour of the night. The sounds of the city beyond the walls are still audible, but they have begun to soften and recede. You hear, faintly, the distant rumble of a cart crossing the Pons Publicius, the wooden bridge further downstream, and the sound carries over the water, muffled and low. Somewhere nearer, a child calls out once and then falls silent, and a dog barks twice before giving up. The river itself is the loudest presence, its voice a constant low murmur, punctuated by the occasional plop of a fish or the gurgle of water passing over a submerged branch near the far bank. You turn your attention to the lamp. Its clay body is a simple closed shape with a single nozzle, the surface blackened around the wick hole where the flame has licked the edge. The oil within is pale gold with a greenish tint, a low-grade olive oil from the estates of Baetica, and it feeds the wick with a slow, steady capillary draw. The flame is just tall enough to make the shadows of the pillars sway gently, but not so tall that it smokes. You take a small bronze trimming tool from your belt pouch and nudge the charred tip of the wick until the flame burns clean. The smell of warm clay and oil mixes with the cooler scent of the brick, and you inhale slowly, letting the stillness of the warehouse settle around you. Outside, the sky continues to deepen through shades of indigo toward full darkness, and the narrow slits of the ventilation grills now show no light at all. You are, for the moment, suspended in the quiet between day and night, with nothing required of you but patience. After a time you rise from the stool and walk to the central aisle, where the great dahlia stand in a silent row. These storage jars are taller than a man, their wide mouths sealed with wooden lids that are themselves weighted with stones, and the lower halves of each vessel are buried in the packed earth floor to keep the contents cool. You pause beside the first dolium and rest your palm on its curved shoulder, feeling the slight graininess of the terracotta and the subtle chill that radiates from within. A faint, clean scent rises from the seal, the smell of olive oil from Spain, a smell so familiar that you no longer consciously register it as separate from the general atmosphere of the warehouse. You count the jars as you walk, touching each one in turn, a total of 18 on the left side and 18 on the right, their number unchanging from one night to the next. Opposite the dahlia, on the right-hand side of the aisle, stand rows of amphorae stacked in 3 tiers, each tier separated by wooden cradles that prevent the vessels from shifting. The amphorae are sealed with cork and wax, and each one bears a painted titulus that indicates its contents and origin. You do not need to read the script, for you have seen the same letters so often that they have become like the familiar cracks in the outer wall. You know that the long, slender amphorae from Crete hold wine, that the round-bellied ones from Kos hold oil, and that the squat, wide-mouthed vessels from Gaul hold a thick, dark wine that smells faintly of pine resin when the seal is fresh. You count these too, a habit formed over many nights, and you find the rows complete. At the far end of the warehouse, past the last of the amphorae, you come to the area where the grain sacks are stored. These are coarse linen bags piled in neat pyramids and covered with heavy leather tarps that keep out dust and damp. You kneel beside the nearest pile and press your palm firmly against the topmost sack, feeling the slight give of the grain within, and you note that the linen is dry and cool, free of any trace of moisture. The grain has a faint mustiness, that is not unpleasant, a smell like sun-warmed straw, and it reminds you of the harvest fields far to the south. You lift a corner of the leather tarp and examine the stitching along its edge, checking for any sign of tearing or gnawing, and you find none. Satisfied, you let the tarp fall back into place and rise to your feet again, brushing a little dust from your palms. Beyond the grain sacks, in the very furthest corner, there is a locked strong-box made of iron-bound oak, small enough to be carried by 2 men, but far too heavy to move without cause. You do not approach it closely, for the strong-box is not your concern. You have never seen it opened, and its contents, whatever they may be, are known only to the warehouse clerk. You simply note that the lock is intact and that the iron bands show no fresh scratches, and then you turn and walk slowly back toward the front of the warehouse. By the time you regain your stool, the darkness outside is complete, and the warehouse interior has settled into its own nighttime arrangement of shadow and lamplight. The flame on the ledge illuminates a circle perhaps 5 paces wide, leaving the rest of the space in a soft gloom where the pillars rise like mute sentinels. You take the tally stick from your lap and examine it again, running your thumbnail gently along the notches. The wood is dry and slightly fibrous, and the grooves have been cut with the same small knife that now rests in your belt pouch. You hear, somewhere in the distance beyond the river, the call of a night watchman on the Aventine Hill, a thin voice carried on the still air marking the hour. The words are indistinct, but the rhythm is as familiar to you as your own heartbeat, and you know without counting that it is the first hour of the night. You pull the small knife from your pouch, a simple iron blade with a bone handle worn smooth, and you cut a fresh notch in the tally stick, a diagonal mark that aligns with the existing groove. The act is small and deliberate, and it requires no thought, only the quiet satisfaction of doing what has been done 1,000 times before. You return the knife to your pouch and let the tally stick rest across your knees once more. Outside, the river continues its soft monologue, and you let the sound wash over you without trying to separate its parts. There is the constant, low rustle of water against the stone embankment just south of the warehouse, the deeper gurgle where the current threads around the wooden pilings of the old ferry dock, and the occasional light splash of a water rat slipping from the bank into the stream. A night bird somewhere overhead emits a thin, weedy whistle that repeats 3 times and then fades, and you identify it as a little owl, a species that haunts the reed beds along the Tiber and calls only in the deep dark. The sounds layer upon each other, each one distinct if you choose to listen closely, but together they form a continuous murmuring backdrop that seems to thicken the silence rather than break it. You shift your weight on the stool, adjusting the fold of your cloak where it presses against your shoulder, and you let your gaze travel slowly around the warehouse. The lamp casts a warm orange light that picks out the edges of the nearest pillars and makes the shadows jump gently each time the flame flickers in a draught. You notice without any sense of urgency that a small spider has spun a web between the corner of the door frame and the wall. The threads are invisible until the lamplight strikes them at just the right angle, and then they glimmer for an instant like a strand of polished silver. You watch the spider, a tiny brown thing no larger than a lentil, as it sits motionless at the center of its web, waiting for something that may never come. The sight is so small and so still that it merges with the general quiet. Your mind drifts, not to any particular thought, but to a calm, open awareness of the physical world around you. You feel the texture of the wool cloak against your neck, the slight pressure of the stool's edge against the back of your thighs, the solid floor beneath your sandals. You smell the oil in the lamp, and the older, earthier smell of the clay that makes up the dolia, and underneath those, the clean, cool scent of the night air that seeps in through the ventilation slits. You taste, faintly, the dust that hangs in the air, a dry, neutral taste that is neither pleasant nor unpleasant. All of these sensations exist together, blending into a single quiet present that requires no response. After a while you rise from the stool and walk a second, shorter circuit of the interior, this time stopping only at the main door to place your hand flat against the wood and feel for any vibration that might signal someone outside. The door is solid and still, and no sound comes from beyond it. You check the lock one more time, though you know it is secure, and then you return to the stool, drawing the cloak a little tighter as the night air cools by a degree. The lamp continues to burn with the same steady flame, the oil level imperceptibly lower than it was when you arrived. You trim the wick a second time, using bronze tool with the same careful, slow motion, and the flame straightens and brightens for a moment before settling back into its soft, even glow. The night deepens, and the distant sounds of the city thin to almost nothing. You hear, or perhaps only imagine you hear, the faint cry of a watchman on the Esquiline, a sound so far away that it could be the wind. The warehouse around you has become its own small world, defined by the circle of lamplight and the solid presence of the goods you guard. You think of the tally stick in your lap, its notches counting out the hours with a precision that requires no clock, no sundial, only the rhythm of the watchman's voice carried over the dark city. You think of Lucius, now at his home somewhere in the Transtiberim, and of the morning guard Sextus, who will arrive at first light to relieve you. Each of you occupies this stool in turn, and the stool remains the same, holding the shape of all its sitters in its curved seat. The thought is not sentimental, only a quiet recognition of the way things are ordered, a small piece of the vast, slow pattern that governs the city's sleep. You let your eyes rest on the lamp flame, watching the way its tip dances very slightly, never entirely still. The movement is hypnotic, a tiny continuous variation that seems to breathe in time with the river. The wick draws the oil upward, the oil becomes light and heat, and the light pushes back the darkness just enough to hold a space of calm at the center of the night. You sit within that space, patient and still, as the first hour of your watch slips silently into the second. Full darkness has settled beyond the warehouse walls, and the ventilation slits now reveal nothing but a blackness indistinguishable from the brick itself. You rise from the stool slowly, the wood creaking once as your weight lifts, and you take the clay lamp from its ledge, cradling the warm base in your palm. The flame sways with the motion, stretching the shadows of the pillars into long leaning shapes that slide across the floor and then resettle. You hold the lamp at waist height, the small circle of light bobbing gently as you begin your first full round of the interior, and your sandals scrape lightly on the packed earth with a sound like dry leaves stirring. The warehouse is arranged as a single vast chamber, its roof supported by rows of brick pillars that rise to meet the timber beams overhead. Between the pillars run the aisles, narrow corridors flanked by stored goods, and you choose the central aisle first, walking directly into the heart of the space. The soles of your sandals are fitted with iron hobnails, and each step produces a soft, rhythmic scratching that echoes faintly off the walls before dying away. You pass the first pillar on your left, a square column of fired brick with faintly beveled edges, and you reach out to touch it. The surface is cool and dry, with a slight grittiness that leaves a fine dust on your fingertips. The lamplight catches the texture of the mortar between the bricks, a pale line that runs neatly horizontal, and you let your hand fall away as you continue deeper. To your left, the great dolia begin. These storage jars are taller than a man, their wide, rounded shoulders emerging from the gloom like the backs of sleeping animals. Each one is half sunken into the earth floor, the packed soil mounded around the lower circumference to hold the vessel steady and to keep the interior cool. You pause at the first doleum and raise the lamp slightly so that the light washes over its curved side. The terracotta is a deep reddish brown, fired to a hard, slightly porous surface that has absorbed countless traces of oil over the years. You can see the horizontal throwing lines left by the potter's hands, subtle ridges that spiral around the belly of the jar, and you trace one of these ridges with a single finger, following its slow curve. The clay is cool, not cold, and it yields nothing to your touch except a sensation of immense solidity. A faint, clean scent rises from the sealed mouth, a smell that is distinctly olive oil, sweet and slightly grassy, originating from the groves of Beatica far to the west. You move to the next doleum, and then the next, counting with the same absent-minded precision you apply every night. There are 18 on this side, each identical in shape, yet each bearing its own subtle pattern of kiln marks and handling scars a chip near the rim of the third jar, a darker firing patch on the shoulder of the seventh, a faint fingerprint pressed into the clay before it hardened on the 12th. None of these details are new, and you note them as you would note the faces of old acquaintances, with a quiet, unsurprised recognition. The wooden lids that seal each doleum are thick discs of oak, fitted snugly into the mouths, and held down by rounded riverstones of varying sizes. You place your palm on the nearest stone, feeling its cool, smooth weight, and you press down gently to confirm that the seal remains tight. The lid does not shift. A thin film of oil has seeped into the wood over the years, darkening it to a rich brown and giving it a faint sheen where the lamplight strikes. You inhale again, and the smell deepens, mingling with the general atmosphere of the warehouse, until it is no longer a distinct scent, but a permanent, quiet presence. Opposite the dolia, on the right side of the central aisle, the amphorae are stacked in careful tiers. These are smaller vessels, each standing about half your height, with narrow necks and 2 sturdy handles curving from the shoulder. They rest in wooden cradles made of pine, the cradles themselves stacked 3 high, forming a stable framework that prevents any shifting. You cross the aisle, your lamp casting a swaying shadow that leaps across the earthen floor, and you stand before the first tier, letting the light play over the rows of sealed mouths. The cork stoppers are pale and slightly spongy, sealed over with a thick layer of wax that has been stamped with the mark of the estate. A tiny bull, or a reef, or a simple palm branch. The wax is hard and cool, and you run your thumb over one stamp, feeling the crisp edges of the impression. These amphorae contain wine from Campania, a fact you know from the painted tituli on their shoulders, where black script records the vintage and the consignment. The paint is slightly faded, worn by handling, but the letters remain legible enough, should anyone ever need to read them. You do not read them tonight. you simply note their familiar shapes, their tilted angles where the cradles have settled, the way the lamplight glints dully on the terracotta surfaces. Beside the companion wine, further along the aisle, a different type of amphora appears, taller, more slender, with pointed toes instead of flat bases. These come from Crete, and their clay is paler, a buff color that reflects the light more brightly. The handles are thinner, almost delicate, and the necks are longer, tapering gracefully to the lip. You tap one lightly with your fingernail, producing a faint, high-pitched ring that fades instantly into the silence. These vessels are older than the others, having made the sea journey many times, and their surfaces bear the fine scratches of rope and net. Yet they are still sound, still sealed, still holding whatever dark wine the Cretan hills produce, a wine with a taste of pine resin and thyme, or so you imagine. Beyond the Cretan amphorae stand the squat, wide-mouthed vessels from Gaul. These are thicker-walled, heavier, their clay a coarse brick, red with visible grit. The wax seals here are thicker too, and some have dried to a cracked milky white. You bend to examine one such seal, and you see that the crack is superficial, not reaching the cork. It has been that way for months, unchanging. The French wine inside has a reputation for smoky depth, and the amphorae themselves seem to embody that quality, solid and dark and unyielding. You count these as well 12 on the first tier, 12 on the second, 10 on the third where a slight gap marks a consignment partially sold, and you register the count without having to speak it aloud. Your footsteps carry you past the wine and into a section where the goods change character. Here the amphorae give way to stacks of coarse linen sacks filled with grain. The sacks are piled in neat pyramids, their rough fabric bulging with the weight of emmer wheat, barley, and farro. Each sack is tied at the neck with a twist of hemp cord, the knot stiff and secure. You reach the first pile and press your palm flat against the side of the topmost sack, feeling the granular texture of the grain within. It shifts slightly under your pressure, a soft, rustling give that is oddly satisfying. The linen is dry and cool, smelling faintly of harvest dust and straw, a smell that evokes open fields and the slow turning of the seasons. You walk around the pile, checking the seams for any sign of tearing or rodent gnawing, but the stitching remains intact, the heavy thread crossing the coarse weave in neat, even lines. A second pile holds barley, the grain lighter in color and smaller in kernel, and when you press it, the sound is a finer, sandier whisper. The farro in the third pile has a distinct earthiness, a smell like dry grass, and its kernels are plumper, harder to the touch. Each pile is covered by a leather tarp, the underside of which is slightly sticky where oils from the grain have condensed, and you lift a corner of each tarp in turn, letting the lamplight probe the shadows beneath, finding nothing but the orderly rows of sacks. At the very back of the warehouse, past the grain, the light falls on a row of sealed wooden chests. These are made of oak planks, iron-bound, and they sit directly on the earth floor, slightly raised on small blocks to prevent damp. The chests contain terra sigillata pottery, a fine red glossware packed in straw, and you know this, because once, months ago, you watched the warehouse clerk open one to verify the contents. Since then, the chests have remained shut, their lids heavy and unmoved. You tap a knuckle lightly against the nearest chest, and the sound is a dull, solid thud that tells you the wood is thick and the contents well packed. The straw inside has a dry, papery scent that seeps through the cracks in the planks, and you catch a faint whiff of it as you pass. Next to the chests, standing alone, is a single iron-bound strongbox, smaller but heavier, its lock a dark, complicated piece of ironwork. You do not linger at the strongbox. You simply note that the lock is in place, the iron bands free of fresh marks, and you move on. The far wall of the warehouse is plain brick, interrupted only by a small high window that is now a rectangle of absolute blackness. You stand beneath it for a moment, tilting your head back to look up at the shutter's dark outline, and you hear, very faintly, the river murmuring beyond the wall. The sound is muted here, reduced to a low, continuous thrum that travels through the brick and earth. There is no other noise, no rats scuttling, no birds calling, only the slow, patient settling of the building's timbers, a soft creak that comes from somewhere overhead and then fades into silence. You listen for a space of perhaps 20 breaths, and you hear nothing else, so you turn and begin your walk back down the opposite aisle, completing the circuit. The return journey mirrors the first, but now the lamplight catches different angles, different details. You notice, for instance, the shadow of a pillar falling across a row of amphorae handles in a way that suggests a figure standing with arms akimbo. You see the fine network of cracks in the clay floor where the earth has dried and contracted over many summers. You spot a single stray piece of straw lodged between two grain sacks, which you pluck out and let fall to the ground. Your pace remains steady, unhurried, each step a deliberate placement of sandal on earth, and by the time you draw near the front of the warehouse again, the lamp's oil level has dropped by a measure no thicker than a fingernail. You regain your stool and sit, the wooden seat still holding a faint remnant of warmth from your earlier presence. You set the lamp on its ledge, and the flame, which had danced with your walking, now steadies into a tall, calm teardrop. You take the small bronze trimming tool from your belt pouch and lean forward to inspect the wick. It has developed a slight mushroom of char, a tiny black bulb at the tip, and you carefully nip this away with the tool's edge, catching the fragment on your thumbnail and flicking it to the earthen floor. The flame burns cleaner afterward, its light fractionally brighter, and the scent of warm oil briefly intensifies before settling back into the familiar, barely perceptible background. You let your eyes travel once more over the warehouse interior, now restored to its nighttime stillness. The dahlia squat in their patient rows, the amphorae lean quietly in their cradles, the grain sacks hump beneath their leather covers like low, slumbering hills. Nothing has changed, and nothing needed to change. The building itself seems to breathe around you, a slow, inert respiration of brick and timber adjusting to the night's coolness. You fold your hands on your lap, the tally stick resting across your knees, and you let the silence close back over you like a thick, soft blanket. The river beyond the walls continues its endless murmuring speech, and you listen without hearing, the sound as constant and unremarkable as your own quiet pulse. The first round is complete, and the night stretches ahead in a long, unbroken line of calm, unmarked hours, waiting to be filled with nothing more than this same slow, attentive stillness. You rise from the stool, cross the short distance to the main door, and draw back the iron bolt with a slow, steady pull that produces a single low scrape. The door swings inward by a handspan, and you prop it open with a small wedge of wood kept for the purpose, a triangular offcut that fits snugly beneath the lower edge. The gap admits a ribbon of night air that curls into the warehouse, cool and faintly damp, carrying the river's voice into the dimness. You return to the stool and settle yourself once more, arranging the cloak around your shoulders, and you tilt your head just enough to face the opening. The lamplight barely reaches the threshold. Beyond it, the world is a deep, velvety black, and from that blackness the sounds come. The Tiber is the first and constant presence, a low, continuous murmur that has been there all evening, but now, with the door open, becomes layered and distinct. Its voice is not one sound, but many, a fabric woven from the water's interactions with every solid thing it touches. The deepest layer is a soft, rushing hum that rises from the main current threading down the center of the channel, a sound like a distant wind moving through a forest of stone. Above this hum, closer to the bank, the water slaps gently against the stone embankment that runs southward from the warehouse, each small wavelet arriving with a delicate hollow clap, then receding with a wet sigh. You know the embankment's exact profile, rough travertine blocks laid without mortar, their faces worn smooth by centuries of the river's attention. The water finds the gaps between those stones, and when it does, a faint gurgle emerges, a sound of air and liquid mixing in a confined space, brief and irregular. Further upstream, where a half-submerged log has been lodged against the bank since the spring floods, the current parts around the obstacle with a continuous low-pitched bubbling that never quite settles into a rhythm. It is a sound you have learned to expect, as familiar as a neighbor's cough. From the downstream direction, perhaps 50 paces away, comes the occasional deeper plop of a fish breaking the surface. This is a sound distinct from the slap of a wave, sharper and more sudden, a single note that appears without warning and then vanishes, leaving only the spreading rings you cannot see. You identify it as a mullet, a common fish in these waters, rising to snatch a drifting insect from the surface film. The insects themselves are silent, but you imagine them, tiny midges and mayflies hatching from the reed beds, their wings transparent and frail. A second plop sounds, then a third, each separated by a long, still interval, and you note that they cluster near the far bank where the water is shallower and the reed stems thick. The night birds add their own thin, intermittent thread to the tapestry. A little owl, the same one you heard earlier, calls from somewhere in the reed beds with a short, reedy whistle that rises at the end like a question, repeats 3 times and then stops. The silence that follows seems to amplify the river's murmur, as if the world is pausing to listen. Later, from higher up, maybe from the branches of the cypress trees that line the Via Portuensis, comes the low, rhythmic chirr of a nightjar, a sound like a pebble being spun in a clay cup, continuous and trance-like. It persists for a minute or more before fading, and when it ceases, the absence of it feels like a small, soft shock. A heron, disturbed from its roost by something unseen, utters a single harsh croak that bounces off the far bank and echoes once, then settles into the general quiet. The bird does not call again. The bird is not empty of human signs, though the hour is late. A small cargo boat, a Nabis Covicaria, is moored downstream near the remnants of the old ferry dock, and you can hear its presence through the mooring rope that strains gently as the vessel rocks. The rope is made of hemp, thick as a wrist, and it creaks against the iron ring set into the stone quay with a sound that is part groan, part sigh, repeating each time the boat lifts on a passing ripple. The ripples themselves come from the distant wake of a larger vessel that passed this way hours ago. its energy still traveling upriver in long, lazy undulations. The boat's wooden hull, tarred and dark, occasionally taps against the stone with a soft, cushioned thud that is more vibration than noise. You imagine the boatman asleep beneath a leather awning, his breathing adding another rhythm to the night, though it is too distant to hear. From beyond the river, from the direction of the city proper, sounds arrive thinned by distance and softened by the intervening air. The most regular is the call of the watchman on the Palatine Hill, a thin, high voice that chants the hour in a formula you have heard so many times that the words no longer register as language, but as a melodic contour, a rising and falling pattern that marks the night's slow progress. The voice carries across the water because the air is still and cool, and because the Palatine rises above the surrounding roofs, giving the sound a clear path. Between the hourly calls, the city offers other, more sporadic noises, the distant clatter of a wagon on the stone paving of the Via Portuensis, a sound that starts abruptly, lasts perhaps 10 seconds, and fades, leaving behind the question of its purpose. You do not wonder about it, you simply note that the cart was there and is now gone. Somewhere in the dense tenement blocks of the Transtiberium, a dog begins to bark in a sharp, rapid rhythm, triggered perhaps by the same wagon, and then another dog joins in, and then both fall silent at the same instant, as if reaching a mutual agreement. The silence that follows is deeper than before. Closer to the warehouse, perhaps on the path that runs along the river bank, you hear the soft, rhythmic crunch of footsteps. This sound is deliberate and slow, the walk of someone who is in no hurry, and you identify it as a fellow watchman making his rounds along the quays. The footsteps pause, and you picture the man stopping to scan the dark water with a hooded lantern, finding nothing, and moving on. The crunch resumes, fainter now, until it merges with the general hum. A brief exchange of low voices comes from the same direction, two men greeting each other in passing. The words indistinguishable, but the tone calm and unhurried. Then the voices part, and the night reclaims its quiet. The natural world makes itself known in 100 small ways. In the reed beds just south of the warehouse, the tall, hollow stems of the phragmites rustle against each other whenever the faintest breeze stirs, and you hear this rustling as a dry, papery whisper that rises and falls without pattern. The breeze is so light that you cannot feel it on your face, but the reeds are finely attuned, their leaves acting as amplifiers for movements of air too subtle for human skin. Within the reeds, a hidden frog produces a single resonant croak, low-pitched and brief, and then falls silent as if embarrassed. The croak is answered by another frog farther upstream, a slightly higher note, and then the two do not continue. The night remains a monologue interrupted rather than a conversation begun. You listen to the silence after the frogs, and in that silence you detect the faint, high-frequency stridulation of crickets. They are not many, just a scattered few in the dry grass at the top of the bank, and their sound is so thin and constant that it dissolves into the air like sugar in water. A bat flits past the open door, its passage marked not by a sound, but by a subtle displacement of air that tickles your cheek, and you hear, a moment later, the faintest possible squeak, a frequency at the very edge of perception. The bat is hunting the midges that dance above the water, and its echolocation clicks are too high for your ears. But the squeak, a social call, dips just low enough to register. You imagine the bat wheeling and diving over the river, a swift, silent shape in the darkness. Its presence reminds you of the other night creatures that share the riverbank, the voles that tumble in the mud, the hedgehogs that snuffle along the base of the walls, the small brown rats that are everywhere and yet almost never seen. A sudden tiny splash near the bank signals either a water vole entering the river or a fish escaping a predator, and the sound is so small, so brief, that it might have been imagined. The river's own internal geography shapes the acoustics in ways you have come to understand. Where the channel narrows between two old stone piers, the current accelerates and the sound shifts from a low murmur to a brighter, more insistent rush. You can locate that spot by ear, a point perhaps 100 paces upstream, and you can tell by the volume of the rush whether the water level has changed. Tonight it is steady, average for the season, the river neither swollen by autumn rains nor shrunken by summer drought. Downstream, where the bank widens into a shallow gravel bar, the sound thins and scatters, the water spreading into a dozen small rivulets that chatter over the stones with a light, tinkling music. You have walked that bar in daylight, and you know the stones, smooth, flat ovals of grey and brown, perfect for skipping, and now their collective voice is a gentle, percussive murmur. A sudden gust of wind, stronger than the previous breezes, sweeps along the river corridor, and for a moment all the sounds shift. The reeds hiss louder, the mooring rope creaks with fresh insistence, the door behind you groans softly as the pressure changes, and the flame of the lamp bends sideways, making the shadows leap. Then the gust passes, and everything subsides into its prior state, the river's hum asserting itself once more over the transient disturbance. The wind leaves behind a slightly cooler air, and you pull the cloak a fraction tighter, your body responding to the change before your mind registers it. The distant watchman calls the second hour of the night, and you note that the voice sounds slightly different from the first hour, perhaps because a different man has taken the watch, or perhaps because the wind has shifted, or perhaps because your own ears have grown more sensitive in the stillness. The call travels across the water, reflects off the far bank, and reaches you as a faint, blurred echo, a heartbeat after the original sound, the two overlapping in a way that makes the words even less distinct. You do not try to understand them, you merely receive the sound and let it pass. The tally stick rests on your lap, and you know you will cut the notch when the next hour comes, but for now you remain absorbed in the listening. The silence between sounds is as much a part of the landscape as the sounds themselves. These silences are not empty, they are filled with a dense, attentive quiet that seems to be the baseline state of the night, the canvas on which all the other sounds are painted. Each new noise, a splash, a creak, a distant voice emerges from this silence and then sinks back into it, leaving it momentarily thicker, as if the silence has swallowed the sound and grown. You have learned to rest in these spaces, to let your attention drift across the open threshold of the door without grasping at anything in particular. The river's hum becomes a kind of auditory blanket, a steady carrier wave that holds all the other sounds in suspension. From the far side of the river, in the district of the Forum Holitorium, comes the crowing of a rooster. It is a single, tentative crow, half-hearted and premature, as if the bird has mistaken some passing light or sound for the dawn. The crow hangs in the air for a moment, then dies away, and no other rooster answers it. The error will not be repeated for hours yet, and you almost smile at the foolishness of the bird. Then you let the thought go, and you return to the broader soundscape. The mooring rope creaks again, and this time you notice a secondary sound, the faint slosh of water inside the boat's bilge as the vessel rocks. It is a low, hollow splash, muted by the wooden hull, and it occurs in a slow, lazy tempo that matches the rhythm of the ripples. You picture the dark water sliding back and forth, slapping the inner planking, and then you let the image dissolve. The reeds whisper, the crickets stridulate, the little owl calls once more from farther away, and you breathe slowly, in and out, in time with nothing in particular. A cart passes on the Via Portuensis, a heavier one this time, and its sound is a complex of many parts, the rumble of iron-rimmed wheels on stone, the jingle of harness bells, the muffled thud of hooves, the creak of wooden axles. The sound grows from a faint smudge on the horizon of hearing to a distinct, layered noise, holds steady for perhaps a minute as the cart traverses a stretch of road parallel to the river, and then fades as the road bends inland behind the warehouses. The fading is gradual, the rumble softening into a low growl, the bells becoming a tinny whisper, until at last only the memory of the sound remains. You realize you have been holding your head slightly tilted toward the door, and you relax your neck, letting your chin drop a fraction. The water continues its endless, patient work. The submerged log upstream gurgles in its irregular way, and you notice that the pitch of the gurgle changes slightly depending on the river's pressure. A larger wavelet, perhaps from a distant barge, will produce a deeper, more resonant bubble, while a smaller ripple yields a higher, quicker blip. This variation is so subtle that it might escape anyone who was not listening closely, but you were listening closely, and you catalogue the differences without effort. The stone embankment offers its own variations, with the wave slaps arriving in clusters of 2 or 3, then a pause, then a single slap, then another pause, a pattern that never exactly repeats. You do not try to find a rhythm in it, you simply accept the pattern as it presents itself. A human cough sounds from the direction of the ferry dock, a single, dry, unmistakably human cough, and you know that the boatman has woken briefly, perhaps to shift his position or to drink from a flask. The cough is followed by a low mutter, 2 or 3 words that do not carry, and then the creak of the boat as the man settles back into his sleep. You imagine the boatman's rough blanket, the smell of tarred wood, the faint warmth of a small brazier now cooled to ash. The image drifts into your mind and then out again, leaving no trace. The night progresses, and the stars you cannot see from inside the warehouse wheel slowly overhead, pulling the constellations through their long arcs. The river, indifferent to stars and men alike, continues to flow, and its sound remains the ground beneath all other sounds, the deep, abiding note that tells you the world is still turning, the water still moving, the night still holding. You sit and listen, and the listening becomes a kind of doing, a quiet, attentive presence that asks nothing and receives everything. The door stays ajar, and the sounds continue, an unending stream of small, peaceful noises that fill the dark hours with their soft, steady music. The night air has cooled by several degrees since you last stood at the threshold, and you feel it now as a gentle, persistent pressure against your cheeks. You rise from the stool, your joints moving with the slow, deliberate economy of long practice, and you push the door open a little wider, just enough to let your body slip through. The wedge of wood that had propped a door falls away, and you catch it with a toe before it can clatter. Then set it aside against the wall. Outside, the darkness is immediate and deep, but your eyes have grown accustomed to the dim interior, and the open air feels vast after the closeness of the warehouse. You step into the narrow alley that runs between the warehouse and the neighboring building, a space just wide enough for two men to walk abreast. The walls on either side are blank brick, and they rise straight up without windows, creating a canyon of shadow. Above you, a stripe of sky appears, framed by the parallel roof lines, and you walk a few paces down the alley to where the view opens a little, tilting your head back to take in the full spread of the heavens. The stars are out in their thousands tonight, sharp and numerous, because there is no moon. You notice this absence first, the way the sky seems darker and the stars brighter, without that silver wash. The Milky Way, which you know as the Via Lactea, stretches across the zenith like a dusty road, a broad band of soft light made of countless stars too faint to see individually. It angles from the northeast, climbing high over the city and plunging down toward the southwest, and its texture is uneven. There are patches where it thickens into luminous clouds, and patches where it thins to a faint, barely perceptible haze. You follow its path with your eyes, tracing it slowly, and you note how it cuts the sky into two great halves. Directly overhead, the constellation Aquila dominates the darkness. The eagle is a simple pattern of 5 stars, and at its heart, the bright point of Altair gleams with a steady white light, pulsing just a little in the restless air. You can see the 2 fainter stars that flank Altair, one on each side, the wingtips of the eagle, and below them the star that marks the tail, a dimmer but still distinct point. The shape is so familiar that you could draw it without looking, and you let your gaze rest on Altair for a long moment, noting its slight twinkle, a rapid, delicate shimmer caused by the movement of the upper air. To the north, Vega hangs lower, a brilliant blue-white star in the small constellation Lyra. Vega is brighter than Altair, almost piercing, and it seems to pulse with a slower, steadier rhythm, a faint throb that you have observed many nights before. You imagine the lyre as a small, angular shape, though you can never quite make out the whole constellation with your eyes alone. It is enough to know Vega's place and to see it shining there, reliable and constant. Turning your head to the south, you pick out the sprawling form of Scorpius, its tail dipping toward the horizon, the red star Antares blowing with a warm orange tint. Antares is low enough that it flickers through the thicker air near the earth, and its color is remarkable, a deep coppery red that sets it apart from the cold white of the other stars. The claws of the scorpion stretch upward, 3 stars on each side, and you trace them with a slow, lazy movement of your eyes. To the west, Jupiter sits just above the dark hump of the geniculum, a steady golden point that does not twinkle at all. Planets, you have learned, do not shimmer like stars. They glow with a calm, even light, and Jupiter tonight is as bright as you have ever seen it, a small, warm beacon that draws your eye repeatedly. Farther east, Saturn is paler, a quieter yellowish dot, and it requires a moment of searching to locate. But once found, it holds your attention with its gentle, unobtrusive presence. Mars is not in the sky tonight, nor is Venus visible. They are below the horizon, traveling through other parts of the earth. The roof of the warehouse cuts a sharp, black silhouette against the starfield, its tiles overlapping in neat, regular rows that angle downward toward the eaves. The tiles are curved terracotta, and their edges catch the starlight in a way that makes them appear as a series of dark, repeating waves, like a frozen river. The neighboring building presents a similar silhouette, and between them the stripe of sky is like a road of stars, framed by the dark geometry of human construction. You notice a single weed growing from the gutter of the warehouse roof, a small dark tuft that trembles slightly in the breeze, and you watch it for a moment before returning your gaze to the stars. The city breathes around you, and from this alley the sounds are different than they were inside. The river's murmur is fainter here, blocked by the bulk of the warehouse, but the sounds of the sleeping city carry more clearly. You hear, very distantly, the cry of the watchman on the Aventine Hill, his voice a thin, high thread that rises and falls in the familiar ritual phrase. The words are indistinguishable at this range, but the cadence is known to you, a pattern that repeats every hour, marking the slow march of the night. The voice comes, hangs in the air for a few seconds, and then fades, and the silence that follows seems to settle deeper than before. A dog barks once somewhere in the Transtiberum, a sharp declarative sound, and then does not bark again, its brief announcement swallowed by the night. You hear, too, the distant hollow clop of hooves on stone, perhaps a horse being led through the narrow streets near the Forum Boreum, and the sound is irregular, pausing and resuming as if the animal is being coaxed along gently. The stars, you notice, are not fixed, they move, though very slowly, and you have learned to mark time by their progress. From this spot in the alley, you can align the bright star Altair with the corner of the warehouse roof, and you observe now that Altair has moved a little since you first looked. The gap between the star and the roof edge is wider by a finger's width, and you know that this small shift corresponds to the passage of an hour or more. You imagine the vast, silent turning of the celestial sphere, the earth rolling beneath your feet, carrying the whole city and the river and the distant sea with it, all spinning together under this same constant canopy. The thought is not dramatic, it is simply a fact, a piece of the night's quiet order. To the east, above the dark mass of the Escaline Hill, you can see the first faint hint of the constellation Orion, not yet fully risen, with only the bright star Betelgeuse visible, a dim red point just above the horizon. Orion will climb higher as the night deepens, and you know that by the time the morning watch begins, the whole hunter will be standing above the hill, his belt and sword clear against the cold sky. For now, only that one red star signals his approach, and you watch it with a patient attention, noting its slow, imperceptible rise. The Pleiades, a tiny cluster of stars in Taurus, are also just above the horizon, a faint, glittering smudge that requires averted vision to see clearly. You let your gaze slide to the side, and the cluster sharpens into a small jewel-like group of 6 or 7 stars, twinkling together like a handful of salt thrown onto dark cloth. The air cools further, and you feel the chill begin to seep through the wool of your cloak, reaching your shoulders and the back of your neck. You pull the cloak a little tighter, crossing your arms under its folds, and the warmth of your own body reflects back, a small comfort. The alley, sheltered from the breeze by the high walls, is still except for the occasional stir of air that brings a fresh, damp smell from the river. You are alone here, but not lonely. The stars are a silent company, and the city's breathing is a constant, reassuring presence. You think of the sailors who are out on the water tonight, navigating the mouth of the Tiber at Ostia, or making the slow journey upriver toward the city. Those men use these same stars to find their way, aligning their course by the position of Altair and the steady light of Jupiter, reading the sky like a map. You imagine the silent warehouses at Ostia, great stone buildings much like this one, their watchmen also standing under the stars, also counting the hours by the movement of the constellations. The river connects you to them, a dark flowing thread that ties the inland city to the open sea, and the sky arches over both places equally, indifferent and perfect. A shooting star streaks across the northern sky, a thin white line that appears without warning and vanishes almost before you can register it, leaving a momentary after-image on your vision. It was there, and then it was not, and you make no wish, you simply note its passage, a small silent event among many. A second meteor follows a few minutes later, this one fainter and shorter, a brief flicker near Vega. You watch the patch of sky where it appeared, but no more come, and you return to the slower, steadier observation of the fixed stars. The roof edge, a dark, straight line, has now moved relative to Altair, the star having climbed higher while you stood. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, feeling the solid, packed earth of the alley under your sandals, and you lean your shoulder lightly against the warehouse wall. The brick is cool through your cloak, and you let the contact ground you. The night is deep and still, and you are suspended in its center, a quiet, motionless point. You hear from somewhere very near a small scratching sound, and you glance down to see a cat picking its way along the base of the opposite wall. It is a tabby, striped and lean, and it pauses when it senses your presence, looking up at you with eyes that gleam green in the starlight. You stand still, and the cat regards you for a long moment, then moves on, disappearing into the deeper shadows at the end of the alley. Its passing is a small, soft addition to the night's texture, and you are not disturbed. Your eyes return to the sky, tracing the faint, irregular outline of the constellation Capricornus, which hangs low in the south, its horn-shaped pattern just visible above the rooftops. The stars of Capricornus are not bright, and you must look carefully to pick them out, but they are there, a dim, scattered group that forms a rough triangle. Next to it, Aquarius is a little higher, with its water jar spilling a stream of faint stars that flows toward the horizon. You follow the stream, a line of 3 or 4 dim points, and you imagine the celestial water flowing down into the earthly river, joining the Tiber and running together toward the sea. The image is a quiet, poetic one, and you let it sit in your mind without examining it. The watchman on the Palatine calls the next hour, and you realize you have been standing in the alley for a long while, perhaps half an hour or more. The voice is clear tonight, the air still enough to carry the sound without distortion, and you hear the ritual words as a series of 5 syllables, a pattern that rises on the 3rd syllable and falls on the 5th, like a slow, melodic chant. You count the hours in your mind, matching the call to the position of the stars, and you feel a small, quiet satisfaction in the alignment. The time is right, the order is kept, and your tally stick inside will soon receive its next notch. The Pleiades have risen a little higher, and you can now count 7 distinct stars within the cluster, tiny pinpricks of blue-white light. You name them to yourself, the 7 sisters, and you recall the old stories that sailors tell about them. Tales of pursuit and transformation, But you do not dwell on the stories. You simply note the cluster's beauty and let it be. The Hyades nearby form a wider, more scattered group around the bright star Aldebaran, which glows with a faint orange tint, warmer than the other stars, like a distant ember. Aldebaran is part of Taurus, the bull, and you can make out the V-shaped cluster of the Hyades that marks its face, a pattern that is easy to find once you know where to look. The Pleiades ride on the bull's shoulder, and together they ascend the eastern sky, climbing slowly toward the zenith they will not reach until late winter. The cold has now settled into your bones enough that you begin to feel a slight stiffness in your knees, and you decide it is time to return inside. You push yourself gently off the wall and walk back down the alley, your sandals crunching on a few loose pebbles, and you reach the warehouse door, which still stands ajar. The faint glow of the lamp spills out onto the ground, a warm orange rectangle that contrasts with the cold blue of the starlight. You step over the threshold, pulling the door closed behind you with a soft, solid thud, and you slide the bolt back into place with a single, smooth motion. Inside, the air is noticeably warmer, heated by the lamp and by the thermal mass of the bricks and the oil jars, and you let the cloak fall loose again as you approach the stool. The lamp continues to burn with its steady, small flame, the oil level now visibly lower than when you left, a shallow pool remaining in the base of the clay body. You settle onto the stool, your back against the door, and you sit for a moment in the warm silence, letting the memory of the stars fade slowly from your eyes. The image of the sky remains with you, a faint after-image of bright points and dark silhouettes, and you can still see, if you close your eyes, the Milky Way stretching across the zenith and Altair glowing overhead. The river's murmur, absent from the alley, returns to your ears now, and you realize you missed it without knowing. Its steady, low hum is the baseline of your watch, and you settle back into it as into a familiar chair. The tally stick rests on your lap, and you pick it up, feeling the wood, and you reach for your knife to cut the notch for the hour that has just passed. The stars will continue their slow wheel, the earth will continue its turn, and you will sit here in the warm circle of lamplight until the sky outside begins to pale and the morning star rises over the eastern hills. You are seated on the stool once more, and the warehouse has settled around you into its deepest night-time quiet. The lamp on the ledge burns with a steady, narrow flame, and its light falls across your lap where the tally stick rests, a length of split pine about as long as your forearm. You pick it up now, turning it over in your hands, and you let your fingers explore its surface. The wood is darkened by the grip of many watchmen before you, the grain raised slightly where sweat and oil from countless palms have worked into the fibers over the years. One side is flat and smooth, the inner face of the split, and it is here that the notches are cut. The other side retains the rough, curved bark of the original branch, its texture shaggy and fibrous. You run your thumb along the flat face, feeling the series of grooves and ridges that map the night's hours, a tactile record of time past and time remaining. The tally stick is a simple instrument, and its logic is immediately legible. The notches are arranged in a single row, each one a small diagonal cut made with a sharp knife, and they vary in depth according to the hour they mark. The evening hours, those belonging to the first watch, are deep and distinct, cut with a firm hand when the night was young and the watchman fresh. The late-night notches are shallower, more hurried perhaps, or simply made with a blunter blade, and they cluster together near the end of the row. A new stick is prepared each evening by the warehouse clerk, a man named Marcus, who splits a fresh length of pine and planes the inner face smooth, leaving the first few notches pre-cut as a guide for the night's progression. Tonight's stick began with 3 starter notches already in place, marking the hours before your arrival, and since then you have added 2 more, each one a small satisfying incision that aligned with the call from the Palatine. You lift the stick closer to the lamp and examine the most recent notch you cut, the one for the first hour of the night. The cut is clean and diagonal, slicing across the grain at a shallow angle, and a tiny curl of wood still clings to its edge, a pale, papery fragment that quivers in the lamplight. You brush it away with your thumb, and the notch stands clear and empty, a small dark mouth in the pale wood. The notch before it, the starter notch for the hour of dusk, is slightly wider because the blade entered the wood at a different angle, and you note this variation without judgment. Each notch is unique, bearing the signature of the hand that made it and the precise moment it was cut, yet together they form a uniform progression, a steady march of marks that counts the night down from sunset to sunrise. From the distant city, the watchman's call rises again, a thin, high voice that threads its way across the dark water and through the ventilation slits. The sound is faint but distinct, a melodic phrase of 5 syllables that climbs, pauses, and falls, and you recognize it as the signal for the second hour of the night. You do not need to hear the words clearly, the rhythm alone is sufficient, as familiar as your own breathing. You let the call fade into silence, then you reach to your belt and draw the small knife from its leather pouch. The knife is a simple iron blade, no longer than your finger, set into a bone handle worn smooth and yellow with age. The edge is keen enough to slice the pine fibers cleanly, and you position it carefully at the spot on the tally stick where the next notch belongs, aligning it with the faint guideline that Marcus scored into the wood. You press the blade down at a shallow angle, and the wood parts with a soft, crisp sound, a tiny crunch that is almost inaudible. The curl of wood lifts away, and you blow it gently from the stick, leaving a fresh, pale notch that stands in neat alignment with its predecessors. You return the knife to its pouch, and the tally stick goes back across your lap, the new mark a quiet testament to the passing of another hour. The ritual of the tally stick is not the only way you keep time. The warehouse itself offers other, more subtle clocks, and you have learned to read them over the many nights you have spent on this stool. The oil lamp, for instance, is a calibrated instrument of a kind. You know that the clay reservoir holds enough oil to burn for roughly 8 hours at a steady flame, and you can estimate how much time has passed by observing the level of the golden liquid within. When you arrived, the oil was high, lapping at the base of the wick holder. Now, after several hours, it has dropped by perhaps a third, the surface now visibly lower, with a darker meniscus where the oil meets the clay wall. The rate of consumption is not perfectly constant, because the wick draws faster when the oil is warm, and the flame itself fluctuates slightly with the air currents. But over the course of a full night, the lamp is reliable enough to serve as a rough chronometer. You tilt the lamp gently, watching the oil slide in a slow viscous wave, and you estimate that it will need no refilling before dawn. The spare flask of oil remains in your belt pouch, untouched. Another clock is the movement of shadows. Although the moon is absent tonight, the lamp casts a strong, steady light that paints the pillars and the goods with sharp-edged shadows. These shadows shift gradually as the flame flickers and as your own position changes, and over the longer span of an hour, you can detect a slight difference in their angles. When you first sat down, the shadow of the nearest pillar fell directly across the threshold of the main door, a dark stripe that cut the doorway in half. Now, because you trimmed the wick and the flame stands a little taller, the shadow has shortened by a handspan, and its edge now falls on the door frame rather than the threshold. The change is so slow that you never see it happen. You only notice, from one observation to the next, that the world has rearranged itself by a small, measurable degree. On nights when the moon is bright, its pale beam enters through the high window and crawls across the earthen floor with a glacial deliberation, a silver rectangle that inches from one dolium to the next over the course of many hours, and you have used that moonlight as a clock too, aligning its edge with a particular crack in the floor and watching it creep away. The sounds of the night also mark the time, though less precisely. The watchman's call is the most regular, occurring at fixed intervals that you could set your knife by, but there are other, softer signals. The little owl in the reed beds calls most often in the early part of the night, its reedy whistle thinning as the hours advance, until by the third hour it falls silent altogether. The frogs, too, have a schedule. They croak most vigorously in the hour after full dark, then quiet down, then resume for a brief chorus just before dawn. The river itself changes its voice with the tide, though the Tiber's tidal reach is weak this far inland, and on some nights you can detect a slight deepening of its murmur when the distant sea presses back against the current. All these small living clocks surround you, and you let them tick on without needing to consult them. Between the notches, the night offers long stretches of stillness, and you fill these with small, silent tasks that keep your hands occupied and the warehouse in order. One of these tasks is the trimming of the lamp wick. The wick is a twist of linen thread that draws the oil upward by capillary action, and as it burns, its tip slowly chars into a hard black knob that smokes if left untended. You take the bronze trimming tool from your pouch, a slim instrument with a curved blade at one end and a tiny spoon at the other, and you lean forward to inspect the flame. The wick has developed a small mushroom of carbon, a dark bulb that glows faintly orange at its edges, and you carefully hook the curved blade under this bulb, lifting it away with a gentle twist. The flame wavers for a moment, then steadies, burning cleaner and brighter. You deposit the tiny fragment of char into the spoon end of the tool and tip it onto the earthen floor, where it joins the other small debris of the night, a dark speck among the dust. Another task is the oiling of the door hinges. You noticed earlier, when Lucius left, that the right-hand hinge emitted a dry, high-pitched squeak as the door swung closed. The sound is not loud, but it disturbs the stillness in a way that you prefer to correct. You rise from the stool and walk to the door, taking from your pouch a small leather flask of olive oil, the same oil that fuels the lamp, but reserved for mechanical uses. The flask holds only a few thumbnails' worth, and you tip it carefully, letting a single drop fall onto the iron pin of the hinge. The oil spreads slowly, a dark, glistening stain, and you work the door back and forth a few times to work it in. The squeak fades immediately, replaced by a low, smooth whisper, and you return the flask to your pouch, satisfied. A third task is the wiping of the bronze key. The key is a heavy, solid object, its surface tarnished to a dark brown, and it lives on a leather cord at your belt when not in use. Over the course of a night, The key can accumulate a fine film of dust or oil from your hands, and you have found that keeping it clean prevents the lock from gumming. You take a scrap of linen from your pouch, a small square of soft worn cloth that is itself stained with old oil, and you polish the key slowly, working the cloth into the wards and along the shaft. The metal warms slightly under your touch, and the tarnish takes on a faint, deep luster. You hold the key up to the lamplight, noting the way the light plays across its contours, and then you return it to its cord, the linen scrap tucked away. Beyond these tasks, there is the simple, quiet duty of watching. You do not watch for anything in particular, you simply maintain a state of open, passive awareness, a readiness that requires no tension. Your eyes travel slowly across the warehouse interior, resting on the familiar shapes of the dolia and amphorae, and your ears remain attuned to the river and the city beyond. The watching is not a strain, it is more like a gentle, continuous hum, a background activity that flows beneath all the other small occupations of the night. The tally stick rests on your lap, and you think about its journey through time. This particular stick, cut from a pine branch somewhere in the hills of Latium, has been in the world for only a few days, but its notches connect it to a long lineage of similar sticks. Each night a new stick is prepared, and each morning the used stick is collected by Marcus the clerk, who transcribes the notches into his wax tablet with a stylus, recording the hours of the watch and any unusual events. The stick itself is then added to a bundle in the corner of his office, a bundle that grows slowly over the months until it is taken away and used as kindling for the bakery ovens. You have seen the bundles, tied with hemp cord, each stick marked with a date in small, neat letters. There is something deeply satisfying about this cycle, the way the wood passes from forest to warehouse to oven, carrying the memory of the night's hours in its notches before releasing that memory as heat and light. You imagine the thousands of notches that have been cut in this warehouse over the years, each one representing a night much like this one. The watchman before you, whose names you do not know, sat on this same stool, held this same knife, and listened for the same distant voice calling from the Palatine. The wood they cut is long since ash, but the pattern persists, a continuous chain of small, deliberate acts that stretches back through time. You are part of that chain now, a single link, and a fault is not grand or emotional. It is simply a quiet fact, a piece of the order that holds the world steady. The lamp flickers once, a brief flutter that makes the shadows dance, and you look up sharply, but it is only a draught from the ventilation slits, a small puff of night air that has found its way across the room. You shield the flame with your palm until it settles, then you return your attention to the stick. The notches are clean and even, and you count them one more time, touching each with the tip of your knife blade as if sealing a private agreement. The count matches your mental tally, and you nod slightly, a small unconscious gesture of confirmation. The third hour arrives with another distant call, and you cut the notch for it with the same careful, unhurried motion. The knife bites into the wood, the curl lifts, and the new mark takes its place. The night is half gone now, and the hours that remain will pass in the same slow, rhythmic way, each one a small ceremony of listening, cutting, and returning to stillness. You set the knife aside and fold your hands over the stick, your eyes resting on the steady flame. The river murmurs, the lamp burns, and the tally stick waits, patient and silent, for the next hour to come. The third hour of the night has come and gone, and the tally stick now bears a neat row of notches that record its passing. You rise from the stool, not because any duty demands it, but because the long stillness has settled into your limbs, and a slow walk through the aisles will restore a comfortable warmth. You take the lamp from its ledge, cradling the warm clay against your palm, and you begin a circuit of the warehouse with a specific, quiet purpose: to inventory the stored goods, to touch and count and confirm that everything remains exactly as it should be. This is not a task anyone has assigned you. It is a ritual you have developed over many nights, a way of knowing the space so completely that any small change would register as clearly as a shout in a temple. The lamp sways with your steps, and the shadows of the pillars lean and bow as you pass. You begin with the olive oil, the first and most constant presence in the warehouse. The dahlia stand in their patient row to the left of the central aisle, 18 great clay jars half sunken into the earth, their wide shoulders rising to waist height. You pause beside the first dolium and raise the lamp so that the light falls across its sealed mouth and the heavy stone that weights the wooden lid. This particular jar, you know from long familiarity, holds oil from the groves of Batica in southern Spain, a region famous for its pale, fruity oil that is prized in the city's kitchens. The clay of the dolium is a deep reddish terracotta, fired to a hard, slightly porous surface, and it bears a painted inscription in black letters just below the rim, a simple mark indicating the estate of origin, a stylized palm branch with 2 fronds. The paint is faded now, worn by the passage of air and the occasional brush of a shoulder, but it remains legible, and you run your finger lightly over the letters, feeling the faint, raised texture of the dried pigment. The jar itself is cool to the touch, and when you press your palm flat against its curved side, you imagine you can feel the massive weight of the oil within, a slow, viscous presence that has traveled by ship and cart and human labor to rest here in the dark. The second dolium is nearly identical, but its clay is a shade lighter, a pinkish terracotta that indicates a different kiln or a different batch. Its inscription reads, Tripolitana, marking the oil as coming from the North African coast, from the region around Lepsis Magna. This oil is known to be slightly greener in color and sharper in taste, a characteristic that comes from the variety of olive grown in that drier, hotter climate. You tap the jar lightly with a knuckle, and the sound is a deep, solid thud, a note so low it seems to vibrate in your chest. The seal is tight, the stone heavy, and a faint, clean scent of oil hangs in the air around the dolium, a scent that has seeped through the wood of the lid over years of storage. You move down the row, touching each jar in turn, and you note the small variations that distinguish them: a chip near the rim of the third, a darker firing patch on the shoulder of the 7th, a faint fingerprint pressed into the clay of the 12th, the halls of the potter's thumb preserved forever in terracotta. The oil inside these jars represents the labor of hundreds of workers, the harvest of entire hillsides, the slow pressing of fruit in stone mills, and the long sea voyage from the ports of Hispania and Africa to the docks at Ostia. All of that effort now sleeps here, in the dark, waiting for the morning when a merchant will come with his scales and his scribe. Beyond the dahlia, the amphorae begin, and you cross the aisle to examine them more closely. These vessels are smaller and more numerous, and they hold wine from various parts of the empire. The first section contains the amphorae from Campania, stacked in 3 tiers within their wooden cradles. Each amphora is a slender tapering vessel with a narrow neck and two strong handles that curve from the shoulder like the arms of a dancer. The clay is a warm golden brown, and the surfaces are smooth, burnished before firing to a slight sheen that catches the lamplight. The necks are sealed with cork stoppers covered in wax, and each wax seal bears the stamp of the vineyard. A tiny bull, incised in fine detail, its horns curving forward, its legs planted firmly. You press your thumb against one of these stamps, feeling the crisp edges of the wax, and you note that the seal is intact, with no cracks or signs of tampering. The painted titulus on each shoulder records the vintage and the consignment in neat black letters, and although you do not read them carefully, you know that these amphorae contain a dark, robust wine that is popular in the taverns of the Suburra. The cradles that hold them are made of pine, their surfaces rough with splinters, and they have been fitted together with wooden pegs rather than nails, a construction that allows the wood to expand and contract with the changing humidity. Further along, the Cretan amphorae present a different profile. These vessels are taller and more slender, with elongated necks and pointed toes instead of flat bases, and their clay is a pale buff color, almost white in the lamplight. The handles are thinner and more delicate, curving tightly against the neck, and the surfaces are decorated with simple painted bands of dark brown spiraling lines that were applied by the potter's wheel. The wax seals here are thinner and more yellow, stamped with a wreath design, and the cork beneath is a dense, fine-grained material that you know comes from the bark of the cork oak, a tree that grows abundantly in the eastern provinces. The wine inside is a resinous white, flavored with pine pitch, a taste that preserves the wine on long sea journeys and imparts a distinctive, sharp flavor. You count the Cretan amphorae, tapping each one lightly with your fingernail to produce a faint, high-pitched ring, and you find all 24 present and aligned. The Gaulish amphorae occupy the lowest tier of the section, and they are unmistakable. These vessels are squat and wide-mouthed, with thick walls of coarse, gritty clay that ranges in color from brick red to a dark, muddy brown. The handles are stout and heavy, designed for gripping rather than elegance, and the rims are wide enough to admit a hand. The wax seals are thick and have dried to a cracked, milky white in places, but the cracks are superficial and do not penetrate to the cork. You recall that this wine is dark and smoky, a product of the vineyards around Massilia, and it travels well despite its rough packaging. The amphorae are heavier than the others, and you do not try to lift them. You simply note their number and their condition, the way their surfaces are pitted and scarred from many journeys. The cradles that hold them are reinforced with extra crossbars, and the pine has been darkened by a spill of wine that occurred long ago, the stain now a faded, purplish brown. Past the wine the grain sacks wait under their leather covers. You walk to the far corner and kneel beside the first pile, setting the lamp on the earthen floor so that its light throws long shadows across the linen. The sacks are made of coarse, undyed flax, woven in a simple plain weave that is strong but breathable, and each one is tied at the neck with a twist of hemp cord. You loosen one cord and peer inside, seeing the pale, plump kernels of emmer wheat, a golden brown grain with a slightly flattened shape and a crease down the center. You take a single kernel between your fingers and roll it, feeling its smooth, hard surface, then you drop it back and retie the cord. The next pile holds barley, a lighter grain with a bluish tinge, smaller and rounder than the wheat, and it rustles with a finer, sandier sound when you press the sack. The third pile is faro, an ancient grain with a dark, reddish-brown husk and a nutty, earthy smell that rises from the linen. You press each sack in turn, feeling the slight give of the grain and the dry, cool texture of the fabric, and you find no dampness, no mold, no sign of rodents. The leather covers that protect the sacks are thick and heavy, their surface is scarred and creased from years of use, and their undersides carry a faint, sticky residue where oils from the grain have condensed. You lift each cover, inspect the stitching along the edges, and let it fall back into place, satisfied that the grain is secure. Near the grain sacks, the sealed wooden chests stand in a quiet row. These chests are made of oak planks, their corners reinforced with iron bands, and they rest on small wooden blocks that raise them an inch above the earth to prevent damp from seeping upward. The lids are heavy and close-fitting, and the iron locks are simple but strong, their mechanisms hidden within the wood. These chests contain terra sigillata pottery, a fine red glossware that is made in the workshops of Arretium and exported across the empire. You have seen such pottery in the markets, smooth, glossy bowls and plates with a brilliant coral red surface, stamped with the potter's name in a small, neat cartouche. The straw that packs the chests gives off a dry, papery scent that seeps through the cracks in the planks, and you catch a faint whiff of it as you pass. You do not open the chests, for they are sealed and accounted for, but you tap each one with a knuckle, hearing the same dull, solid thud that confirms the contents are undisturbed. At the very end of the row, the iron-bound strongbox stands alone. It is smaller than the chests, but far heavier, its oak planks sheathed entirely in iron, and its lock is a dark, complicated piece of metalwork that requires a special key. You've never seen this box opened, and its contents are known only to the warehouse clerk and the merchant who owns it. You do not speculate about what lies within. Your duty is simply to note that the lock is in place, that the iron bands show no fresh scratches, and that the strongbox has not moved from its position. You crouch beside it, bringing the lamp close, and you run your eyes over the lock and the bands, finding nothing amiss. The iron is cold and slightly rough under your touch, with a faint bloom of rust in one corner where the damp once reached it, but the rust is old and stable, and you leave it undisturbed. You rise and make your way back along the opposite aisle, completing the circuit. The lamp casts a warm, shifting glow that picks out the edges of the amphorae and makes the shadows of the dolia swell and shrink. The air in this part of the warehouse is cooler and carries a complex blend of scents, the clean, grassy smell of olive oil, the faintly sharp note of wine, the mustiness of grain, and the dry, woody scent of oak and straw. These smells are so familiar that you no longer notice them consciously. They are simply the atmosphere of the warehouse, as constant as the darkness and the silence. You pause once more at the main aisle, looking back at the long rows of stored goods, and you feel a quiet sense of completeness. Everything is in its place, every jar sealed, every sack dry, every chest locked. The inventory is complete, and the warehouse holds its treasures in a state of perfect, patient stillness. You return to the stool and set the lamp back on its ledge, adjusting the wick so that the flame burns low and steady. The night continues outside, the river still murmuring, the city still sleeping, and you fold your hands over the tally stick once more. The knowledge of the warehouse's contents settles in your mind like a map, a detailed, orderly picture of oil and wine and grain and pottery, all of it resting peacefully in the dark, waiting for nothing, needing nothing, simply being. You close your eyes for a moment, and you can still see the rows of dolia, the stacked amphorae, the plump sacks of grain, arrayed in perfect, silent order behind your eyelids. The image is a comfort, a small, steady world within the larger world of the night, and you let it hold you as the slow hours pass. The tally stick rests across your lap with its neat row of notches, and the lamp burns on its ledge with a flame that has settled into a tall, steady teardrop. The warehouse around you is still and silent, and you find yourself inclined toward a different kind of attention now. An attention turned not outward to the goods in the shadows, but inward, or rather toward the immediate physical reality of your own presence in this place. You are a watchman, and a watchman is defined by the things he carries, the equipment and clothing that make his long stillness possible. You let your gaze drop to your own hands, then to the folds of your cloak, and you begin a slow, methodical examination of every item you wear or carry, one by one, as if you were cataloguing the contents of a small, personal warehouse. Your cloak is the outermost layer, and it has been with you since you first took this post. It is made of heavy brown wool, woven in a simple plain weave that produces a fabric both dense and flexible, capable of holding warmth even when the river mist rises and the temperature drops by several degrees. The wool comes from sheep raised on the hills of northern Latium, and its natural color is a deep earthy brown, the shade of turned soil after rain, undyed and unbleached. The fibers are long and slightly coarse, and when you rub a fold between your fingers, you feel a faint prickle, a roughness that has softened with years of wear, but never fully disappeared. The cloak is rectangular, a single piece of cloth without sleeves or fastenings, and you wear it draped over both shoulders, its weight distributed evenly so that no single point presses too hard. The border is finished with a band of darker thread, a simple twill tape that prevents fraying, and this border has worn thin in places, the wool napped into a soft, fuzzy edge. You bring a corner of the cloak to your nose and inhale. It smells of sheep lanolin, wood smoke from the brazier in your tenement room, and the faint, dusty scent of the warehouse itself, a composite odor that is entirely familiar and entirely yours. The cloak is held closed by a fibula, a bronze brooch shaped like a leaping dolphin. The dolphin is small, no longer than your thumb, its body arched in mid-jump, its tail curved upward and its snout pointed down toward the fabric. The bronze is dark with age, a deep greenish-brown patina that gathers in the crevices of the design, and its surface is scratched from years of use, the metal polished smooth where your fingers press it each evening. The pin that pierces the wool is a simple straight bronze wire, slightly bent from an old accident you no longer remember, and it slides through the weave with a familiar resistance. You unpin the fibula now, just to feel its weight in your palm, and you note how the dolphin's eye is a tiny, punched dot, how the tail flukes are indicated by two swift incisions. The warmth of your hand transfers to the metal, and the bronze grows almost alive under your touch before you pin the cloak closed again. Beneath the cloak, your tunic is a simple garment of undyed linen. Its natural color, a pale, creamy beige that has darkened slightly with sweat and washing. The linen is a plain tabby weave, the warp and weft threads crossing in a simple over-under pattern that produces a fabric both light and strong. The tunic reaches to your knees, and it has long sleeves, unusual for indoor wear but practical for the night watch when the air cools and the body's heat ebbs. The sleeves are set in with flat felled seams, the raw edges enclosed so that nothing chafes, and at the cuffs the linen has frayed slightly, the thread separating into a fine soft fringe. A small repair at the left hem draws your eye, a patch of newer linen that you stitched yourself with a needle and thread one quiet afternoon, the stitches small and neat, but not invisible. You run your thumb over the repair, feeling the slight ridge where the new fabric overlaps the old, and you recall the afternoon sun falling through the window of your tenement room as you worked, the quiet satisfaction of mending something worn back to wholeness. A leather belt cinches the tunic at your waist, a strap of cowhide about 2 fingers wide, darkened to a deep chestnut from years of handling. The leather is thick but supple, and it is molded to the shape of your body, curving slightly at the back where it passes over your hip bones. The buckle is iron, simple and square, its tongue a straight, tapered spike that fits into one of the many holes you have punched along the strap's length. You adjust the belt by 1 notch, pulling it a little tighter, because the night's coolness has made your tunic hang more loosely, and the leather creaks softly as it moves. Attached to the belt by a short leather thong is your pouch, a small drawstring bag of soft goatskin, its surface worn to a velvety smoothness. The pouch contains your small belongings, and you open it now, loosening the drawstring and peering inside. Within are a few dried figs, their skins wrinkled and dusted with a fine white bloom of natural sugar, a piece of hardtack bread, dense and pale, its surface pierced with the docking holes that prevent it from blistering in the oven, and a lump of salt wrapped in a dried bay leaf, the salt crystalline and greyish, the bay leaf brittle and fragrant. These are simple provisions, enough to sustain a man through the long hours without weighing him down, and you close the pouch again without taking anything out. Beside the pouch, on a separate thong, hangs the small iron knife you use for cutting the tally stick. You draw it now and hold it up to the lamplight, examining the blade. The iron is dark grey, mottled with a faint pattern of forged scale that was never fully ground away, and the edge is sharp, but not razor fine, honed on a whetstone until it bites cleanly into pine wood. The blade is straight and simple, a single-edged shape that tapers to a point, and the tang runs through a handle of bone, a section of a sheep's femur, perhaps, hollowed out and fitted snugly. The bone has yellowed with age, and its surface is polished to a smooth, waxy sheen by the oils of your hand. A single bronze rivet secures the blade, and you test it with a wiggle. It holds firm. The knife is small enough to conceal in your palm, but it is sufficient for every task the night requires. Your sandals are the next object of your attention, and you lean forward on the stool to examine them. They are simple constructions of thick leather sole and narrow straps, the soles cut from the shoulder of a cowhide where the skin is thickest, and the straps threaded through slots at the sides to cross over the instep and wrap around the ankle. The soles are studded with iron hobnails, small dome-headed nails that protect the leather from wear and provide a sure grip on the packed earth floor. The hobnails are arranged in a simple pattern of 2 parallel rows, and many of them have worn flat on the bottom, their edges rounded and polished by countless steps. The left sandal shows a distinct wear pattern on the outer heel, a place where the leather has compressed and thinned because your weight falls more heavily on that side when you walk. The straps have stretched slightly, conforming to the shape of your foot, and the leather has darkened where sweat and dust have accumulated. You run your finger along the inner surface of the strap, feeling the slight roughness where the leather's flesh side was never smoothed, and you note that a small crack is beginning to form near the toe. It will need repair soon, but not tonight. Your staff leans against the door frame within easy reach, and you take it up now, laying it across your lap for inspection. It is made of chestnut wood, a straight, sturdy branch that was cut from a coppice tree and stripped of its bark, then seasoned for a year before being finished. The wood is a pale honey brown, with a subtle grain that runs straight down the length, and its surface is polished by your grip to a smooth, almost glossy sheen. The staff reaches from the ground to your shoulder when you stand, and its thickness is just right for your hand to close around comfortably the circumference of a hen's egg. A small knot near the top, where a side branch once grew, provides a natural thumb rest, a place where your thumb fits perfectly each time you take up the staff. You have carved nothing into the wood, no marks or names, but you know every inch of it by touch, the slight flattening on one side where it rested against a wall for many months, the tiny crack near the base that opened during a dry summer and never spread further, the dark patch at the very bottom where it has absorbed moisture from the earth. The staff is more than a tool. It is a companion, an extension of your arm that has walked every round with you and leaned beside you through every hour of stillness. Back in your pouch, alongside the food, you carry a few more items of equipment. The bronze trimming tool you have already used several times tonight, and you draw it out again to look at it more closely. It is a slim, elegant instrument, cast in one piece and finished with a file. One end curves into a small hooked blade, sharp on its inner edge, designed to snip away the charred tip of the lamp wick. The other end widens into a tiny shallow spoon, no larger than a lentil, which catches the fragment of char so that it does not fall into the oil. The bronze is a warm golden color, brighter than the fibula, because it is handled less and polished by use rather than age, and its surface is perfectly smooth. You turn it over in your fingers, appreciating the clever simplicity of its design, and then you return it to the pouch. Next to the trimming tool lies a small leather flask of spare lamp oil, its stopper tightly fitted and sealed with a smear of beeswax. The flask is made of the same goatskin as your pouch, but thicker, with the hair side turned inward to create a more waterproof vessel. It holds perhaps a cup of oil, enough to refill the lamp once if the night runs long, and its weight in your palm is reassuring, a small reserve against the darkness. You check the stopper, finding it firm, and you put the flask away. The final item in your pouch is a scrap of linen cloth, a square about the size of your hand, which you use for cleaning the key, wiping dust from the lamp, or any other small task that requires a soft, absorbent material. The linen is a remnant from an old tunic, its edges frayed and its surface stained with old oil and dust, but it is clean enough for its purpose. You smooth it flat on your knee, noting the faint grid of the weave, and then you fold it into a neat square and tuck it away. Your attention returns to the lamp itself, the center of your small pool of light. It is a simple closed shape, a wheel-thrown clay body with a single nozzle projecting from the front, and its design is so common that you have seen 100 identical lamps in the markets and the insulae. The clay is a pale buff color, covered with a thin reddish slip that is fired to a matte finish and the upper surface is slightly concave, sloping down toward the filling hole in the center. The nozzle is pinched and smoothed, and the wick hole is a neat, round puncture, its edges blackened by the flame. The lamp holds perhaps an hour's more oil, and you swirl the remaining liquid gently, watching it coat the interior with a slow, golden wave. The oil is a low-grade pressing from Spanish olives, slightly cloudy and greenish gold, and it has a mild, pleasant scent that mingles with the warm smell of the clay. You set the lamp back on its ledge and fold your hands once more over the tally stick, which has been waiting patiently throughout this inventory. The stick itself is an item of equipment, and you examine it now with the same deliberate care. Its split pine body, its flat inner face, its row of neat notches. The knife that cuts those notches rests in your pouch, and the pouch hangs from your belt, and the belt cinches your tunic, and the tunic lies under your cloak, and the cloak is pinned with the dolphin fibula. Everything connects, layer upon layer, forming a complete and orderly system that holds you together through the long hours of stillness. You think, without urgency, about the origins of these objects, the trees and animals and human hands that brought them into being. The chestnut staff grew on a hillside in the Sabine country, drawing water from the soil and light from the sun, until a woodcutter harvested it and shaped it and sold it in a market. The wool of your cloak was shorn from a flock of sheep in a pasture somewhere north of the city, then carded and spun and woven by women, whose names you will never know. The lamp was thrown on a potter's wheel in a workshop near the Tiber, its clay dug from a pit outside the walls, its oil pressed in a stone mill on an estate in Baetica. The bread in your pouch was baked in a bakery somewhere in the Transtiberim, its flour ground from wheat grown in the fields of Sicilia, its salt harvested from evaporation ponds on the coast. All these things have traveled great distances to converge here, in this quiet warehouse on this particular night, and you are their temporary custodian, the one who wears and holds and uses them in the silent performance of your duty. The thought is not sentimental. It is simply a recognition of the vast, slow network of making and moving that sustains every small, still moment. The night continues outside, and you feel the weight of your equipment settling around you like a familiar embrace. The cloak keeps the chill at bay, the tunic breathes against your skin, the sandals hold your feet in their worn, comfortable grip. You are ready for the remaining hours, provisioned and protected, a small, self-contained outpost of watchfulness in the dark. You let your eyes rest on the lamp flame and your breathing slows, and the inventory is complete. The stool has shaped itself to your weight over the long hours, and you sit now in a state of quiet suspension, the warehouse door propped open by its familiar wedge of wood. Beyond the threshold, the night presses close, and from that darkness a vast composite hum reaches your ears. It is not a single sound so much as a presence, the accumulated breath of a million sleepers, the distant murmur of a city resting. You let your head tilt back slightly, your eyes half close, and you allow the hum to wash over you without trying to pass its parts. The lamp on its ledge continues to burn with a steady flame, and its small circle of light holds you at the center of a much larger darkness, a darkness that stretches out across the river and into every street and alley and courtyard of Rome. You think of the Suburra first, that dense warren of tenements and narrow lanes lying in the valley between the Esquiline and Viminal hills. Even now, at the deepest hour of the night, the Suburra is never truly silent. You imagine the sound of a baby stirring in a cramped apartment on an upper floor, its cry a thin, bleating thread that is quickly muffled by a mother's shushing, her voice a low, rhythmic murmur that blends with the creak of a wooden bed frame. The walls of the insulae are thin, and noises travel easily between apartments, so that a single cough can ripple through an entire building, setting off a chain of small, sleepy responses. You imagine a man turning over on a straw mattress, the rustle of his blanket, the soft groan of the ropes beneath him. In another room, an old woman lies awake, listening to the distant barking of a dog, and she does not mind the sound because it is familiar, a part of the night's texture. The Subra hums with this quiet, distributed restlessness, thousands of small lives suspended in sleep, their breathing rising and falling like a vast, gentle tide. North of the Subura, the Campus Martius opens out into a broad, level plain that by day is filled with exercising soldiers, chariot races, and the clamour of public assemblies. Now, in the deep night, it lies empty and still under the stars. You imagine the grass, still damp from the evening dew, stretching away in a dark, silent carpet, broken only by the occasional solitary tree. The great open space collects the cool air that flows down from the hills, and a faint breeze stirs the leaves of the plane trees that line the old exercise grounds. An owl, perhaps the same little owl that haunts the reed beds by the river, has found a perch on a broken column, and it surveys the darkness with unblinking yellow eyes. No human voice disturbs the Campus Martius at this hour. The soldiers are asleep in their barracks, the athletes in their homes, and the politicians are tucked away in their atrium houses, their slaves dozing in the doorways. You can almost hear the silence of that place, a silence so deep it becomes a sound in itself, a low, hollow pressure against the ears. To the west, across the river, the Transtiberum district clusters along the bank in a jumble of workshops and tenements and small walled gardens. This is where Lucius, the day guard, has his home, a small room on the second floor of a brick insula that backs onto a tannery. Even at night, the tannery has a smell, a sharp, acrid tang that rises from the curing vats and hangs in the air, and you imagine Lucius sleeping through it without notice, his nose long accustomed. The streets of the Transtiberum are narrow and twisting, and a single dog patrols them now, a lean yellow cur with a torn ear, padding silently from corner to corner, investigating scraps. The dog pauses at a public fountain, lapping a few mouthfuls of water from the stone basin before moving on. The fountain itself is fed by an aqueduct that runs all the way from the hills, and even at night the water trickles softly, a thin silver sound that echoes in the empty square. Closer to the river, the Forum Boarium lies empty, its broad paved expanse still warm from the day's sun. By day, this is the cattle market, a noisy, dusty, reeking place filled with lowing oxen and shouting traders, but now the only occupants are a few sleeping cattle, their massive bodies lying in a huddle near the river gate. You imagine the slow, rhythmic grinding of their jaws as they chew their cud in their sleep, the occasional deep sigh from one of the great beasts, the soft, heavy sound of a hoof shifting on stone. The porticos that surround the forum are deep in shadow, and a cat, a tabby with green eyes, is hunting among the pillars, stalking a rat that has ventured out from the sewer grate. The cat's movements are silent, its paws making no sound on the worn stone, and the rat, unaware, continues its nibbling at a discarded apple core. The drama is small and ancient, predator and prey playing out in the dark while the city sleeps. Beyond the Forum Boarium, the Forum Holitorium, the vegetable market, is even quieter. The stalls are empty, the wooden trestles folded and stacked, and a single donkey stands tethered to a post, its head drooping, its large ears twitching occasionally as it dreams. You imagine the donkey's slow, patient breathing, the slight stir of its tail, and you recall that in a few hours the market will come alive again with the arrival of carts laden with cabbages and onions and leeks. But for now, the donkey is the sole guardian of the empty square, and it stands as still as a statue, waiting for the dawn. You draw your attention back toward the river and the district of the Velabrum, a low-lying area of shops and granaries that sits between the Palatine and the Tiber. Here, even at this hour, there is a faint glow of light from a single bakery, its oven already being fired for the morning bread. You picture the baker, a broad-shouldered man with flour permanently caked under his fingernails, feeding sticks of dried olive wood into the low, arched mouth of the furnace. The flames cast a flickering orange light that spills out onto the cobblestones, and the smell of wood smoke drifts up into the night air, a promise of warm loaves to come. The baker's apprentice, a boy of perhaps 12, is measuring flour in a large wooden trough, his movements slow and heavy with sleep, and he yawns widely, his jaw cracking. The bakery is the first place in the city to stir each morning, its oven a small bright heart beating in the pre-dawn darkness, and you feel a quiet kinship with the baker, another man who keeps watch through the small hours. On the Palatine Hill itself, the houses of the wealthy are dark and silent, their atriums closed, their gardens still. You imagine a slave dozing beside a door, a thick woolen blanket wrapped around his shoulders, his back against the cool marble. A single torch burns in a bronze bracket near the entrance, its flame guttering in the faint breeze. Inside, the master of the house sleeps on a bed of ivory and bronze, his wife beside him, their children in separate rooms. The family's dreams are as small and private as any, and in sleep they are no different from the tenants of the Subura. The watchman on the Palatine, the one whose voice you hear each hour, is stationed at a post near the temple of Apollo, and he is, at this moment, perhaps leaning against a column and staring up at the same stars you observed earlier. You picture his face, a man you have never seen, with a short beard and a missing tooth, and you imagine him counting the hours by the slow crawl of Altair across the roof of the temple. He too holds a tally stick, and his knife, like yours, will soon cut another notch. Your mind wanders further, across the saddle of the Velia to the Esquiline Hill, where the great gardens of Messina spread out in terraced splendor. The gardens are dark now, the flowers closed, the fountains stilled, and the only sound is the rustle of leaves in the ornamental shrubs. A nightingale, a rare visitor from the countryside, has found a perch in a cypress tree, and it begins to sing, a liquid, rippling cascade of notes that pours out into the silence. The song is beautiful and unexpected, and you imagine it drifting down the hill and across the rooftops, reaching the ears of a sleepless old man in a nearby insula who smiles in the dark. The nightingale sings for perhaps a minute, then falls silent, and the Esquiline returns to its quiet. On the Salian hill, the barracks of the night watch are alive with a low, subdued activity. You think of the other watchmen like you, stationed at granaries, docks, and public buildings throughout the city, each one marking time in his own way. Some walk slow circuits with hooded lanterns, their boots echoing on stone. Others sit on stools as you do, listening to the night. One man, a watchman at the Porta Capena, is struggling to stay awake, his head nodding forward and then jerking back, his lamp burning low. Another, at the Emporium dock, is sharing a quiet conversation with a sailor who cannot sleep, their voices low and companionable. You are part of this scattered network, a loose brotherhood of watchers, each one a small, bright point of alertness in the vast, sleeping city. The thought is comforting, and you let it settle in your mind. Back on the river, a barge from Ostia is moored just downstream, its crew asleep under a canvas awning. The barge carries a cargo of imported goods, amphorae of fish sauce from Spain, bales of linen from Egypt, and small chests of spice from the eastern provinces. The cargo is silent. It smells locked away, but you imagine the faint, briny scent of the fish sauce seeping through its seals, a sharp contrast to the clean river air. The bargemen sleep heavily, exhausted from their journey upriver, and one of them snores with a deep, resonant rumble that carries across the water. The snoring is rhythmic and oddly soothing, a low mechanical sound like a distant pump, and you listen to it for a moment before it fades as the man shifts in his sleep. A sudden, sharp yowl cuts through the night, making you blink and straighten slightly on your stool. It is a cat, somewhere very near, perhaps in the alley between the warehouse and the next building, and its cry is a high, angry sound that rises and falls in a quick, jagged arc. The yowl is followed by a scuffling noise, the rapid patter of paws, and then a hiss, and then silence. You picture the tabby you saw earlier, or perhaps another, defending its territory against a rival, the two animals facing off with arched backs and flattened ears. The confrontation is brief and decisive, and the loser retreats into the darkness, leaving the victor to resume its patrol. The cat yowl has the effect of sharpening your awareness, pulling you back from the distant districts to the immediate reality of the warehouse door, the lamplight, and the river's steady murmur. You blink a few times, your eyes dry from the long watch, and then you settle back into the stool, your heart rate unchanged, your breathing calm. The city, you realize, has grown quieter even since you last noticed. The deep hour before dawn is approaching, the time when even the dogs stop barking and the sleepless old women finally close their eyes. The hum that rose from the city is now more a feeling than a sound, a vibration that travels through the earth and the brick of the warehouse, a low, fundamental tone that underlies everything. You imagine the streets, empty under the stars, the cobblestones cool and dark, the shutters all closed, the doors all bolted. A single guard dog lies across a threshold near the Forum Bararium, its chin on its paws, its eyes half open, and it does not stir. A street sweeper, an old man with a birch broom, has begun his slow work in the Forum, the bristles scratching rhythmically on the stone, a sound so faint it is barely a whisper. You let your gaze travel around the warehouse, returning fully to your own small domain. The lamplight flickers once, a brief, soft pulse, and then steadies. The dolia squat in their patient rows, the amphorae lean in their cradles, and the grain sacks hump under their leather covers. Nothing has changed, and nothing needed to change. You are the still center of a still world, and the city beyond the walls sleeps on in its vast, gentle quiet, holding its breath for the dawn that is still some hours away. You fold your hands over the tally stick, feel the familiar wood under your fingers, and let the midnight calm wrap around you like a second cloak. The first hint of change arrives not as a sight, but as a quality of the air, a subtle thinning that you feel against your face before your eyes can confirm it. You've been sitting on the stool for a long while, the tally stick now carrying its full burden of notches, and the lamp has burned low enough that the oil surface sits well below the halfway mark. The darkness beyond the open door remains deep, but something in its texture has shifted, a barely perceptible dilution that speaks of the approaching dawn. You rise slowly, your joints stiff from the long stillness, and you step to the threshold, pulling the door wider so that you can stand full in the opening. The river air, cooler now than at any point in the night, touches your cheeks and forehead with a clean, damp freshness, and you inhale deeply, letting it clear the lamp-scented stillness from your lungs. You step outside, leaving the door ajar behind you, and you walk the short distance to the riverbank itself, your sandals finding the familiar slope of packed earth and rubble that leads down from the warehouse wall. The path is so well known to you that your feet find the way without guidance, avoiding the loose stone near the old post and the small depression where rainwater sometimes pools. At the water's edge, you stop and turn to face east, toward the dark hills that rise beyond the city. The Tiber at your feet moves with its eternal low murmur, but the sound seems softer now, more hushed, as if the river too is waiting. Above the eastern horizon, the sky has begun its slow transformation. The blackness that dominated the night is no longer absolute. It has given way to a deep, inky indigo, a color so dark it is almost still black, yet undeniably different, as if a single drop of blue pigment has been stirred into a vast pot of ink. The stars that were so sharp and numerous earlier have begun to fade, the dimmer ones vanishing first, while the brighter ones cling on with a pale, fading insistence. Altair still shines overhead, but its light is thinner now, a ghost of its midnight brilliance, and Vega to the north has become a faint, trembling point that seems to dissolve as you watch. Jupiter, low in the west, still holds its steady golden glow, but it too is dimmer, its light diluted by the growing brightness that seeps upward from the hidden edge of the world. The morning star Venus dominates the eastern sky, hanging just above the dark crest of the Esquiline Hill. It is brilliant and solitary, a cold white beacon that outshines everything else in the heavens, and its light does not flicker, but glows with a steady, intense presence. You fix your eyes on Venus and watch it, unblinking, as the sky around it continues to change. The indigo fades by imperceptible degrees into a deep slate blue, the color of a storm-washed sea, and then, so slowly that the shift is complete before you realize it began, the slate softens into a cool, pale gray. The transition takes a long time, perhaps half an hour or more, and you stand motionless throughout, your hands tucked into the folds of your cloak, your breathing slow and even. The stars continue to retreat, one by one, as if the sky is a vast stage and the actors are quietly exiting. The Pleiades, which you watched earlier as they rose above the horizon, are now a barely visible smudge, a ghost of their former glitter, and soon they are gone entirely, swallowed by the gathering light. Orion, which had climbed high in the southeast, fades to a faint outline, his belt stars the last to disappear, 3 pale pinpricks that wink out in succession. The Milky Way, that great dusty road across the zenith, thins and dissolves like a mist burned away by the sun, leaving only a smooth, empty expanse of blue-gray. The process is gentle and without drama. A quiet erasure that happens so gradually you never catch a single star in the act of vanishing. They are simply there, and then they are not. The first true color appears on the horizon as a thin line of ochre, a warm, earthy gold that hugs the crest of the Aventine Hill and spreads slowly outward, seeping into the grey-like water, into dry sand. The ochre deepens, intensifying through shades of amber and apricot, and it pushes higher, driving the darkness upward and westward. The clouds, which you could not see in the night, reveal themselves now as thin, horizontal bands of pale pink and lavender, their undersides catching the first reflected light of the sun that has not yet risen. The sky becomes a layered composition with the warm gold at the bottom, the cool slate above it, and the last vestiges of deep blue retreating toward the west. The river responds to the brightening sky. Its surface, which was a featureless black sheet throughout the night, begins to take on a faint sheen, a slick, silvery gloss that catches the gathering light. You can now make out the individual ripples that pattern the water, each one a tiny moving ridge that catches the dawn and sparkles briefly before subsisting. The far bank, which was invisible in the darkness, emerges as a dark, reedy line, its details still obscure, but its shape now clear. The moored boats downstream also materialize, the grain barge from Ostia, a long, low vessel with a canvas awning, the small fishing coracle tucked against the stone embankment, its round basket-like hull bobbing gently, and the ferry raft tied to its post, its wooden planks dark with damp. Each of these you have known were there all along, but their visual return is a quiet reassurance, a confirmation that the world has not rearranged itself in the darkness. The birds begin. Not in a sudden dramatic chorus, but one by one, each voice entering the silence with a tentative solitary note. The first is a single blackbird, hidden somewhere in the reeds to your left, and its call is a short fluting phrase, a few liquid notes that rise and fall in a question, then repeat. The sound is clear and sweet, and it seems to hang in the cold air like a drop of water suspended from a leaf. A moment later, a sparrow chimes in from the roof of the warehouse behind you, its voice a rapid chattering series of chips and chirps, busy and cheerful. The sparrow is joined by another, and then a third, and soon a small scattered conversation is underway among the tiles. From under the Ponte Pudricis, the old wooden bridge downstream, comes the soft cooing murmur of pigeons, a low rhythmic sound that blends with the river's hum. The pigeons stir and flutter, their wings clapping against the bridge timbers as they shift position. A heron, the same one that croaked in the night, rises from the reed bed with slow, heavy wing beats, its long legs trailing behind it, and it flies low over the water, a grey silhouette against the pinkening sky. The air, which has been cool all night, now takes on a crisp, sharp edge, the coldest moment of the 24 hours arriving just before the dawn. You pull your cloak a little tighter, tucking it under your chin, and you feel the slight dampness of dew on the wool. The ground at your feet is also damp, the packed earth dark with moisture, and a fine silvery dew clings to the blades of grass that grow in scattered tufts along the bank. A patch of wild mint, growing near the old ferry post, releases its scent as you brush against it, a sharp, clean aroma that rises and mingles with the smells of river water and damp soil. You bend and pick a single leaf, crushing it between your fingers, and you inhale the familiar, refreshing fragrance before letting the leaf fall. The line of ochre on the horizon has now expanded into a broad band of gold, and the sky above it has paled to a soft, luminous blue. The last of the night's clouds are now visible as thin, high streaks of cirrus, their edges gilded by the approaching sun. Venus, which had held its post so valiantly, is now fading fast, its light overwhelmed by the growing brightness, and you watch it flicker once, as if in farewell, and then disappear. The day has arrived, or is arriving, and the world is fully revealed once more. You turn from the river and walk your final perimeter, the same path you took at dusk, but now in reverse, with the light increasing with every step. The outer wall of the warehouse shows its familiar cracks and patches, the tufts of dry grass sprouting from between the bricks, the pile of broken amphorae sherds behind the northeast corner, now visible in its full, dusty detail. You touch the wall as you walk, the same cool brick under your palm, and you find everything exactly as it should be. The high window, when you glance up, now admits a rectangle of pale blue light, and the shutter, which you left latched, remains secure. At the main door, you pause and look back at the river, now a broad silvery expanse under the brightening sky, its surface alive with the small sparkling movements of the current. Inside, the warehouse is still dim, the lamp still burning, but the quality of the darkness has changed. The light from the high window and the open door has begun to seep inward, reaching the nearest pillars and softening their shadows. You walk to the stool and pick up the tally stick, examining it one final time. The row of notches is complete, every hour accounted for, and you take the small knife from your pouch and cut one last mark, a deeper, more decisive notch at the very end of the row, signaling the conclusion of the watch. The wood parts with a soft, crisp sound, and the curl falls away onto the earthen floor. You pinch the wick of the lamp between thumb and forefinger, extinguishing the flame with a brief hiss. A thin curl of smoke rises from the blackened tip, twisting in the air and then dissipating, and the smell of warm oil gives way to the cooler, fresher scent of the morning. The lamp's clay body is hot, and you set it carefully on the ledge to cool. You gather your staff from beside the door, feeling its familiar weight in your hand, and you drape your cloak more securely over your shoulders. The watch is over, and you are ready for the handover that comes with the full light of day. Dawn arrives fully now, and the city wakes around you in a slow, steady accumulation of small sounds. You stand just outside the main door of the warehouse, your staff in hand and your cloak still wrapped around your shoulders, watching the light spread across the riverfront. The sun itself has not yet cleared the Aventine Hill, but its influence is everywhere, in the golden wash that now covers the eastern sky, in the lengthening shadows of the moored boats, and in the way the Tiber's surface has turned from silver to a pale, shimmering bronze. The air is still cool, carrying the last freshness of the night, but there is a promise of warmth in it, a hint of the day to come. The sounds of waking are distinct now, layered upon the river's constant murmur. From the direction of the Forum Auditorium, you hear the first creak of wooden shutters being opened, a sound that repeats at irregular intervals as shopkeepers prepare their stalls. A voice calls out, not the ritual chant of the night watchman, but the ordinary hail of a vegetable seller setting up his trestle table, greeting a neighbor with a few words too distant to distinguish. The clatter of a cart follows, its wheels rumbling over stone, and you know that the first loads of cabbages and onions are arriving from the farms outside the walls. The donkey you imagined earlier, the one standing tethered in the empty market, brays once, a long, rasping sound that echoes off the surrounding porticos and then falls silent. Closer to the river, a servant woman fills a clay bucket from the public fountain near the old ferry dock. You can hear the splash of water, the rhythmic gurgle as the bucket sinks and fills, and then the wet dripping sound as she lifts it out and sets it on the stone rim. Her sandals slap against the packed earth as she walks away, and the sound fades gradually into the general hum. Somewhere upstream, a boatman coughs and spits into the water, then begins coiling a rope on the deck of his barge, the hemp scraping against wood with a dry, fibrous rustle. The night's stillness is gone now, replaced by the quiet, purposeful activity of early morning. You turn and re-enter the warehouse one last time. The interior, so long defined by the small circle of lamplight, is now dimly illuminated by the grey daylight that seeps through the high window and the open door. The shadows that were so deep and absolute have softened into a diffuse gloom, and the rows of dahlia and amphorae stand in a muted half-light, their colours beginning to show. The lamp on its ledge is cold now, its wick black and stiff, and you pick it up, feeling the residual warmth in the clay. You will leave it for the day guard to refill, as is the custom. The tally stick you tuck into your belt, its row of notches complete, ready to be handed over. You hear footsteps approaching along the path outside, a steady, unhurried tread that you recognize. A moment later, a figure appears in the doorway, silhouetted against the brightening sky. Sextus the day guard, a younger man with a leather satchel slung over one shoulder. He is broader than you, with a short dark beard and a manner that is always calm, always deliberate. He nods as he steps over the threshold, and you return the nod, exactly as Lucius greeted you at dusk, exactly as you have greeted each other on countless mornings before. Sextus sets his satchel down beside the stool and glances around the warehouse, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. The morning air has brought a faint chill with it, and he rubs his hands together once briskly before letting them fall to his sides. You unloop the key from your belt, the heavy iron key still cool from the night, and you hold it out to him. He takes it, his fingers closing around the familiar shape, and he hangs it on his own belt without comment. Then you hand him the tally stick, the split pine with its neat row of notches, and he accepts it, tilting it toward the light from the door to read the record of the night. The stick tells its simple story, 7 notches, evenly spaced, no unusual marks, no disturbances. A clean watch, a quiet night. You speak for the first time, your voice low and a little rough from the long silence. You tell him that all is quiet, that the main door remained locked, that the perimeter was walked and the interior inventoried, that the grain sacks are dry and the dahlia seals are intact. No strangers approached the warehouse, no unusual sounds disturbed the night, and the river stayed at its normal level throughout. Sextus listens, nodding once or twice, his expression unchanging. He does not ask questions, because there are no questions to ask. When you finish, he simply says that he will take over now, and he thanks you in a quiet, matter-of-fact tone. The exchange is complete. You gather your cloak, pulling it more snugly around your shoulders, and you pick up your staff from where it leans against the door frame. Sextus has already settled onto the stool, his satchel open beside him, and he is checking the lamp, tilting it to gauge the remaining oil. You leave him to his work, and step out through the door into the full light of the morning. The sun has now cleared the hill, and a low golden light slants across the riverfront, casting long shadows from the warehouses and the piles of cargo. The world feels larger than it did during the night, its boundaries expanded, its details sharper. You walk along the riverbank, following the same path you took in reverse just before dawn, but now you continue past the warehouse, heading toward the main thoroughfare that leads into the city. The Tiber slides along beside you, its surface now a bright, rippling bronze, and you watch a heron standing motionless in the shallows near the far bank, its long neck curved like a question mark. A small fishing boat is out on the water, its single occupant casting a net with a practiced circular motion, the mesh spreading in the air before settling onto the surface with a soft, spreading splash. The fisherman does not look up as you pass. You pass the old ferry dock, where the raft still bobs at its tether, and you see the boatman you heard in the night, a lean, weathered man with a sun-browned face, now awake and pouring water from a clay jug over his hands. He nods at you as you walk by, and you nod back, a silent acknowledgment between two men who share the river. Beyond the dock, the pile of old amphora sherds is now bright in the sunlight, their terracotta fragments blowing in shades of orange and pink, and the cat you saw in the alley is curled asleep on the warmest sherd, its tail tucked neatly around its body. It does not stir as you pass. The path curves away from the river and joins the Via Portuensis, the old road that runs from the river port toward the city gates. The morning traffic is light but steady, a cart laden with firewood, its driver walking beside the oxen with a long goad, a small group of labourers carrying their tools over their shoulders, their voices a low murmuring conversation, a woman balancing a basket of bread on her head, the loaves still steaming slightly in the cool air. You walk among them without hurry, matching the pace of the morning. The city has fully shaken off sleep now, and its rhythm surrounds you, a gentle, familiar tide. You come to the street vendor who sets up his stall each morning at the corner where the road meets the city wall, a thin man with a crooked nose and a clay brazier that burns olive wood. He sells posca, the sour, watered-down wine that the common people drink, and he has a pot of it simmering on the coals, the steam carrying a sharp, vinegary scent. You stop and exchange a few coins from your pouch, and he ladles a cupful into a small earthenware beaker, handing it to you with a brief, professional smile. The posca is warm and tart, and you drink it slowly, standing at the edge of the stall, feeling the liquid spread its faint heat through your chest. A few other early risers stand nearby, sipping their own cups, their faces still soft with the remnants of sleep. No one speaks much. The silence of the night lingers in the shared understanding that the morning is a time for quiet. You return the beaker and continue on your way, crossing through the gate and into the network of narrow streets that wind through the Transtiberim. Here the buildings press close on either side, their upper floors overhanging the street and blocking the direct sunlight, so that you walk in a cool, blue shadow. Shop doors are being unbarred and a smith is already at work in his forge, the ring of his hammer a steady metallic pulse that echoes down the lane. You pass the bakery whose oven you imagined in the night, and sure enough, the smell of fresh bread pours from its doorway, a warm, yeasty aroma that makes your stomach stir. The baker's apprentice, the boy you pictured, is stacking round loaves on a wooden rack, his flour-dusted arms working with the slow, methodical rhythm of the half-awake. Your tenement is on a small side street off the main thoroughfare, a 3-story insula of brick and timber with a narrow doorway and a steep staircase inside. You push open the wooden door, which is never locked during the day, and you climb the stairs slowly, your legs feeling the accumulated weight of the night's hours. The stairwell is dark and smells of cooking oil and dust, a familiar close scent. Your room is on the 2nd floor, a small space with a single window that looks onto a courtyard. You lift the iron latch and step inside, closing the door behind you with a soft click. The room is simple and spare, as you left it. A straw mattress lies in a wooden bed frame against one wall, its surface covered with a woolen blanket that is now cool to the touch. A small 3-legged table holds a clay water jug and a chipped cup, and on the floor beside the bed, a pair of worn sandals sit side by side. The window shutter is latched but not tight, and a narrow blade of sunlight falls across the floor, illuminating the dust motes that drift lazily in the still air. You lean your staff against the wall, unbuckle your belt and hang it on a peg, and drape your cloak over the foot of the bed. The fibula, the little dolphin brooch, glints once in the sunlight as you set it aside. You pour a cup of water from the jug and drink it, the water cool and clean, washing away the last taste of the posca. Then you cross to the window and open the shutter a little wider, letting the morning light and the sounds of the courtyard enter. Below, a woman is hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 posts, her movements slow and deliberate, and a child is playing with a wooden top on the flagstones, its hum a low, buzzing drone. The sounds are soft and distant, a gentle backdrop to your own quiet. You lie down on the mattress, pulling the blanket up to your waist, and you stretch your legs out, feeling the satisfying release of muscles that have been still for too long. The straw rustles under you, adjusting to your shape, and the pillow, stuffed with wool scraps, cradles your head. You close your eyes, and the impressions of the night float behind your eyelids. The steady flame of the lamp, the rows of dahlia, the sound of the river, the stars wheeling overhead. The watch is over, and the day has begun without you, and for now there is nothing required of you except rest. The city outside your window continues its quiet, busy life. Its sounds a muffled current that carries you toward sleep. You hear the distant cry of a street vendor, the clop of a donkey's hooves, the laughter of the child in the courtyard, and these sounds blend together into a low, soothing hum. The sunlight creeps across the floor as the sun climbs higher, its warmth reaching your feet through the blanket, and you feel the weight of the night slowly lift. You breathe in and out, and the rhythm is slow and even, and the world grows softer, more distant, as you drift on the quiet tide of the morning. The warehouse, the river, the tally stick, the stars, all of it recedes, and you are left with only the simple, peaceful fact of rest, earned and now received, as the sun fills the room with its gentle golden light.